The laughter arrived even before he knocked on the door. Ethan Cole heard it from outside the window, loud, nonchalant, the kind that doesn't try to hide from anyone. He was 23, standing on the sidewalk in front of a venture capital firm in downtown Austin, wearing the only blazer he owned and carrying a briefcase that had taken him 4 months to assemble. His hands weren't trembling. That surprised him. The receptionist inside had already seen him through the window and looked away. The man at the reception desk was whispering something to a colleague, and the two were smiling in the direction of Ethan's shoes. He'd noticed the scratch on his left shoe that morning and said it didn't matter. Standing there, with the cold December air biting his neck, he told himself again. Even so, he pushed open the door. The lobby smelled of money, leather, air conditioning, and the quiet confidence of people who never doubted they belonged anywhere. Ethan went to the reception desk and said his name. The man there, whose name tag read Marcus, typed something with 2 fingers, frowned, and typed again. Then he looked up with the kind of patience that isn't patience at all. Cole? There's no Cole on the schedule for today. Ethan pulled out the printed email confirmation, the one he'd read 17 times on the bus that morning. Marcus examined it as if it were a spelling mistake on a birthday cake, a problem someone else had created and that he was now being asked to solve. He picked up the phone with 2 fingers. He sighed first. The man who came down wasn't the one Ethan had been exchanging emails with. He introduced himself as Derek Walsh, senior partner, and the way he stated the title made it sound like a wall. Walsh was in his early 40s, polished in a way that requires money and effort every day. He looked at the briefcase. He looked at his shoes. He said, "We generally don't meet with people who don't have institutional backing." Ethan said he had a tested product, real data, a working prototype built in a warehouse in South Austin. Walsh smiled the way people smile when they've already made a decision but still want to feel generous by pretending to listen. He said, "Leave the briefcase." He didn't say he was going to read it. He didn't say anything else. He turned and went back to the elevator, and the click of his shoes on the marble sounded like a door closing slowly. Ethan Cole grew up in Lubbock, West Texas, in a house where the heater broke every winter, and no one fixed it because the repair cost more than the family had that month. His mother, Sandra, worked 2 jobs, cash register in the morning, cleaning an office at night, and came home with swollen feet and eyes that showed she had nothing left to complain about. His father had left when Ethan was 8. Not dramatically, just a one-day trip. Growing up like that doesn't make you angry at the world. It makes you very aware of what people waste without realizing it. Time, money, attention. Things that, for Ethan, were always too scarce to be treated carelessly. He had discovered programming at 14 on a computer borrowed from the public library. There were no courses, no mentors, no one in Lubbock who knew enough to teach him. There were only forums, tutorials in English with an accent he barely understood, and a silent stubbornness that Sandra recognized in her son as the same stubbornness she used to pay the bills. At 17, he was already fixing systems for small local businesses for $50 a visit. At 19, while his peers were choosing colleges, he had identified a specific flaw in healthcare logistics systems. Small clinics losing money every month because of duplicate appointments and poorly integrated medical records. He didn't yet know the extent of what he had found. He only knew that the problem existed, that it was real, and that no one had solved it properly. The product was called ClearPath. It was clinical management software simple enough for a receptionist without technical training to operate, yet robust enough to integrate data from 3 different systems simultaneously. Ethan had built the first version himself in a warehouse he rented for $200 a month in South Austin, where he had moved with a backpack and $2,000 in savings. He slept on an air mattress. He cooked rice. He took cold showers because the shower heater never worked, and he chose to spend the money on a server. 3 small clinics were already using the system, paying a monthly fee. The numbers were modest, but the data was clear. A 32% reduction in scheduling errors in the first month of use. Derek Walsh had received Ethan's portfolio, and what he did with it became clear 2 days later. An assistant of Walsh's sent a short email saying that the firm had evaluated the proposal and concluded that the target market was too narrow to justify the expected return. Ethan read that email 3 times, not because it was difficult to understand. It was too simple. He read it because there was a sentence in the middle that bothered him in a way that took him hours to name. The sentence read, "We suggest that the founder consider seeking market experience before presenting again." He was 23 years old, had 3 real clients, concrete data, and someone who had never read the entire document was suggesting he go gain experience. He closed his laptop and stared at the warehouse ceiling for a long time. What Walsh didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that the week before the meeting, Ethan had received an email from a Tennessee clinic network, a company with 42 offices, asking if ClearPath could be scaled up. The network's operations manager, a man named Ray Tillman, had found the product through one of Ethan's initial 3 clients. Ray wasn't an investor. He was a practical man, tired of seeing money slip through holes that expensive systems couldn't plug. He wanted a meeting. Not in Austin. He wanted Ethan to come to Nashville. Ethan had agreed without hesitation, but hadn't told Walsh because Walsh had never asked. Nobody had really asked anything. Nashville in January has a damp, clingy cold that won't come off. Ethan arrived by bus because a plane ticket was out of his budget that month, and he spent the night in a motel 12 kilometers from the clinic's office. The room smelled of damp carpet, and the air conditioning only worked on the cooling setting. He stayed up until 2 in the morning reviewing presentation slides on a laptop with a worn-out battery, plugged into the wall socket next to his bed because unplugging the charger meant losing everything. There was a technical issue that Ray Tillman would certainly address: integration with the federal billing system that the larger clinics used. And Ethan had spent 3 weeks finding the solution. He had found it. But explaining a technical solution to someone who had never programmed was a different kind of problem, and it was the one that kept him awake. The meeting with Ray lasted 2.5 hours. Ray was a man in his 50s, short, with broad shoulders, and the direct manner of someone who had spent his life solving problems that other people didn't want to touch. He listened to Ethan without interrupting. He asked 4 surgical questions. He asked to see the system working in real time, so Ethan opened the laptop, connected to the server at the warehouse in Austin, and showed the 3 clinics operating live. Ray was silent for almost a minute. Then he said, "How much do you want per office per month?" Ethan had rehearsed the answer. He said the number. Ray wrote it down on paper, did a quick calculation with a pen, and said, "Send me the contract by Friday." Ethan left the building, crossed the parking lot, sat on the curb, and stood there for a moment simply breathing the cold air. The contract with the Tennessee network represented 42 offices at a monthly rate that multiplied ClearPath's current revenue by 14. It wasn't $1 billion. It was survival with room to breathe. And at that moment, it was exactly what Ethan needed to prove that the product scaled. He returned to Austin, paid 3 months' deposit up front, hired a freelance developer named Priya Nair, who had responded to a simple ad on a tech forum and charged half of what others were asking because she was between jobs and believed what she read. Priya was good, better than good. In one day, she identified a bottleneck in the system that Ethan hadn't seen in months, and the way she talked about the problem, direct, without beating around the bush, made Ethan understand that he had found someone who saw the code the same way he did. It was Priya who found the article. It was an industry publication aimed at healthcare managers, and there was a short note in a technology column mentioning ClearPath as an emerging solution to watch in the independent clinic segment. Neither of them knew who had written it. Neither of them had spoken to any journalists. The note was 3 sentences long and included a link to the product's website, which Ethan had put together over a weekend for $40. The day after the article, there were 11 new emails in their inbox. Over the next 3 days, 27 more arrived. Not all of them were serious. Some were competitors trying to map the product. But mixed in were 4 operational managers from clinic networks in different states, and 2 of them explicitly mentioned that they had already tried more expensive solutions and that those hadn't worked. Derek Walsh had also read the article. Ethan found this out in an unexpected way. An assistant of Walsh's called the website's contact number, asking if the company was still accepting strategic investors. Ethan answered the call himself, recognized the firm's name, and paused for 3 seconds before responding. Then, with a calmness that surprised even himself, he said that ClearPath was currently in the process of evaluating other partners and that they would get back to him if there was availability. He hung up. Priya was on the other end of the line and asked who it was. Ethan said the firm's name. Priya knew it. She had been rejected by them 2 years earlier when she tried to raise capital for her own project. They were silent for a moment, and then Priya resumed typing without saying anything more. The problem surfaced in the 5th week. One of the Tennessee Network's clinics reported a synchronization glitch that had duplicated patient records for 2 days without anyone noticing. It wasn't catastrophic from a technical standpoint. No data had been lost, no patients had been harmed, but it was exactly the kind of glitch that destroyed contracts. Ray Tillman called at 7 in the morning with a voice that wasn't angry. It was worse. It was controlled disappointment. He said he needed a solution within 48 hours or he would be forced to invoke the termination clause. Ethan and Priya worked 22 hours straight. Ethan didn't sleep. Priya napped for 2 hours on an air mattress that was still in storage and returned. By 5:40 the next morning, the system was fixed, the records reconciled, and a complete report was waiting in Ray's email. Ray read the report before 6 in the morning. He called back at 6:15. He simply said, "You found the problem before I asked you to look for it, fixed it ahead of schedule, and sent me a report that my other suppliers were never able to produce." He paused. "I have a cousin who runs a chain in Colorado. Can I mention his name?" Ethan said yes. That afternoon, an email arrived from Colorado. 2 days later, another arrived from Oregon. The machine had started running on its own, without advertising, without a campaign, without an investor, just by the weight of a product that worked when it was hardest to work. But the scale of what was coming was bigger than what Ethan and Priya could sustain alone, and they both knew it, and neither of them had enough money to hire in time. It was that week that Marcus Hale appeared. Not the Marcus from the reception desk at Walsh's firm, another Marcus, completely different. Marcus Hale was a former health technology executive who had sold his own company 5 years earlier and had since operated as a quiet angel investor. No office, no website, no public presence. He had read the article, then called Ray Tillman on his own to ask about the system, and Ray had given him Ethan's number without warning. Marcus called one Tuesday afternoon and said, without preamble, "I know what you have, and I don't think you know the size of it yet." Ethan stood listening. There was something in the man's tone, not enthusiasm, but precision, that made the cold, single lamp-lit warehouse seem, for a moment, much smaller than the world outside. Marcus Hale asked for a week to analyze the numbers before any discussion about money. Ethan sent everything: revenue, contracts, performance data, the Tennessee failure report with the documented solution. Marcus read every line. In the next meeting, held via video because Marcus was in Seattle, he opened with a phrase that Ethan hadn't forgotten since. "Most founders send me what's good. You sent me what broke. That's why I'm here." "Me," He proposed an initial investment sufficient to hire 5 developers, set up a minimal support structure, and cover 6 months of operation. In return, he wanted a small stake and a clause preventing Ethan from selling the company for the next 3 years without his consultation. Ethan read the contract twice, showed it to Priya, and signed it the following afternoon. Marcus's money changed the pace, but it didn't change the pressure. It increased it. With 5 new developers, problems that were previously invisible due to lack of time became visible due to excessive demand. 2 of the hired developers weren't delivering at the necessary pace. One of them had omitted experience from his resume. Ethan dismissed them in the second week, without drama, with the clarity of someone who has no room for being kind to what doesn't work. Priya took over technical coordination without anyone asking. She simply started doing it, and the others naturally followed her. On the outside, ClearPath was growing. On the inside, it was an organism that still didn't quite know its own shape. And it was in the midst of this organized chaos that Derek Walsh requested a personal meeting. Not by email this time, by phone, with the voice of someone offering a favor. Walsh wanted to sit down and talk about the future of the product. He used the word partnership twice in 3 minutes of the call. Ethan listened to everything without interrupting. Then he asked, with a calmness that had taken him years to build, "Did you read the folder I left?" There was a pause. Walsh said he had reviewed the material with the team. Ethan asked again, differently, "Did you personally read it?" The silence lasted longer this time. Walsh began to talk about internal processes, the volume of proposals, screening criteria. Ethan waited for him to finish. Then he said he would think about it and give an answer soon. He hung up. He stood there looking out the window of the warehouse, which was now a real office, with desks and chairs and the smell of brewed coffee, and felt something that wasn't anger. It was clarity. The turning point didn't come like a bolt of lightning. It came like things that were built slowly and suddenly become too big to ignore. 3 weeks after the connection with Walsh, ClearPath had active contracts in 8 states, 217 practices, and a waiting list of 42 clinical networks awaiting onboarding. Marcus Hale had shared the numbers with 2 contacts in San Francisco, not to recruit, just to inform them. As he put it, within 48 hours, Ethan was contacted by one of the largest venture capital firms specializing in health technology in the country. Not an assistant, not a junior partner. The firm's founder called personally, said he had 20 minutes to talk, and spent 53. By the end of the call, a formal proposal was being prepared. The number had 8 digits. The proposal arrived by email one Wednesday morning at 8:42. Ethan was in the office. Priya was across the room. He read it silently, then called Priya over without saying anything, just turning the notebook toward her. Priya read it. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "This is real." It wasn't a question. It was the realization of someone who had slept on the same air mattress, fixed the same system at 5 a.m., and was now looking at a number that transformed everything that had been sacrificed into something concrete and measurable. The valuation implied in the proposal placed ClearPath at over $1 billion in projected market value. Ethan wasn't a billionaire at that moment, but the world had decided, with data and signatures, that what he had built was worth that. The news leaked before any official announcement was made. A health technology publication ran an article citing sources close to the deal and mentioning Ethan by name, product and origin, Lubbock, Texas, warehouse south of Austin, 3 initial clients. The article had a tone Ethan hadn't asked for and didn't control. Hero, underdog, the kid nobody took seriously. He read it twice and felt a discomfort that took time to name. The story was true, but there was something unsettling about being turned into a narrative while the work was still happening. while Priya was still fixing code and the developers were still onboarding new clients. The world had decided the story was over. For Ethan, it had simply reached a point where it became visible to others. Derek Walsh posted on his professional network 2 days after the article. He congratulated Ethan on ClearPath's impressive growth and mentioned, with the nonchalance of someone who believes what he's saying, that he had followed the product's development from the early stages. There was no technical lie in the statement. There was something worse, the convenient version of the story. Ethan saw the post, Priya saw it, Marcus Hale saw it, and sent a one-line message. Want to respond? Ethan stared at the question for a while. Then he wrote back, no need. Because the answer already existed. In the contracts, in the data, in the 217 offices, in the flaw fixed at 5 in the morning in Tennessee, on the desks in the office that used to be a warehouse. Walsh had told a story. Ethan had built a company. The signing of the investment contract took place in a glass-walled room in San Francisco, with lawyers from both sides, and Marcus Hale participating via video from Seattle. Ethan wore the same blazer he'd worn the day he walked into Walsh's lobby. Not symbolically, but because it was still the only blazer he owned, and there were more pressing things to spend money on. No one commented on the shoes. When the pen hit the paper, there was no euphoria. There was silence, handshakes, coffee that went cold because no one remembered to drink it. Ethan left the room, walked down the glass corridor overlooking the bay, and called Sandra in Lubbock. She answered on the second ring, her voice still adjusted to receiving calls in the middle of the day. He said, "Mom, it worked." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I know, son. I always knew." Ethan returned to Austin 2 days later, not to the warehouse, to the office that had become the warehouse, with real desks and brewed coffee and the constant noise of people working on something that mattered. He bought a new heater for his apartment, the first he had ever bought for himself. He called his landlord in Lubbock and paid 3 months of back rent that Sandra had omitted to mention so as not to worry him. He hired 2 more developers, this time with enough time to properly interview them. Priya became a partner with a formal stake because the time had come for the paperwork to reflect what had been true for months. None of this was celebrated with a party. It was done with the same calm with which Ethan had done everything else, like someone who knows that the work doesn't end just because the number has grown. ClearPath reached 380 practices before the end of the quarter. The waiting list didn't shrink. Ray Tillman from Tennessee became an active advocate, mentioning the product at industry conferences without being asked. Marcus Hale remained silent and present, the way the best partners know how to be. Derek Walsh never called again. The post was still online, with congratulations from people who had never been in a room with Ethan, never read the briefcase, never really asked anything. Ethan hadn't responded and wouldn't respond. There was a version of himself who would have spent months thinking about that post, that lobby, that smile directed at his shoes. That version had stayed outside the glass door in Austin in the cold of December, while the other Ethan pushed the door open and went inside. There was a photo Sandra had kept in a drawer in Lubbock. 11-year-old Ethan, sitting in front of an old computer in the public library, his face pressed against the screen and his shoulders raised in concentration. She had never shown it to him. After the call from San Francisco, she took the photo out of the drawer, snapped a picture with her cell phone, and texted it without a caption. Ethan stared at that image for a long time. The boy in the photo knew nothing yet. He didn't know about deposits. He didn't know about Walsh. He didn't know about Nashville or Priya or 8-figure contracts. But there was something in the way he held his eyes on the screen, in that silent library room, that said it all. There was an attention there that the world would try to interrupt many times, and that had never stopped.